So I met Galase when I was here in 2009. She'd worked for the past 3 years to save up money to be able to have her own place. And this past week, we started looking for a place for her to stay in Galase. That's where she wanted to live. So we drove all over town. And it was just more of the same story. There's no availability, it's too expensive, or the place would be run down. And one morning, we thought that there was a house that we had found and where she was supposed to stay. And we got there, ready to move into the house, and
this is a nice street.
The whole deal ended up just falling through.
When Allison met Galase,
she was our neighbor in Galase, and I called her and said, if you ever want to come over for Bible study, you're welcome to. And she showed up at my house the next day with a notebook and all these really deep spiritual questions in the notebook.
Galase was just coming and she was hungry for the Word of God, and they sat down and they would study the Bible every day, and at the end of the Bible study, Allison would say, well, you know, how does this apply to your life?
Well, we would get to that point and Galase would always say, I need a job. I'm like, okay, that's really not the application from John 3. Let's talk about that again. But every story, you know, Mary and Martha, the application is, I need a job. And I'm like, okay, we're just not connecting somehow on this, you know.
And so Allison started working with her with interviewing skills, and she would go to interview and she wouldn't get the job. She would go to this interview and she wouldn't get the job.
So I even started to get discouraged. So my application to every Bible study all of a sudden became, Galase needs a job.
So finally Allison said, well, do you have any, skills? Can you make anything? And Galase said, well, yeah, I can make these paper beads that a missionary taught me a long time ago how to make.
I'm kind of thinking like, oh, okay, anything else? That sounds pretty weird, you know? But she's like, no, it's actually really cool. A missionary a while ago taught me how to make them. And
she said, well, why don't you go make a lot of them at your house and then bring them, because there's a volunteer team here, and so we'll try to sell them, to the volunteers.
And so she shows up at my house 3 days later, eyes bloodshot, this huge bag of beads that she had been working on. And she says, I haven't slept in 3 days. And it's just all these beads. And I'm like, oh man, I hope I can sell these,
They sold every single one of them, and it was enough money for like a couple months rent.
So I call her up, I'm like, we need to talk. So she shows up at the house, I give her the money, she's crying. We're just rejoicing and thinking this is so cool.
I mean, it was the first time in her entire life that she was able to have a job and make money for herself.
She continues to make the beads. We continue to have Bible study every day. I encouraged her, just start reading through the Gospels. Just start in Matthew, read chapter by chapter, and just see what God teaches you.
She would text Allison late at night, you wouldn't believe, the story that I read about Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well.
I just read the greatest verse. It's John 3:16. You have to read it. It's so good,
One night, Galase texted Allison, basically said, I have to come to your house tomorrow. We have to talk.
She says, I was reading last night and I got to this part where it says, to be forgiven, you have to forgive. She said, I stayed up all night thinking about this, and I decided that I need to tell you, it's time for me to tell you my story.
She was really young. She became very ill, and her family tried everything. They, took her to church and they prayed over her. They took her to the doctor. They got medicines, and when nothing was working, they resorted to witchcraft. And so they took Galase to the witch doctor, and basically the witch doctor said, I need you to leave her here for a month.
She says she remembers walking on the way there crying and asking them, please don't leave me there, please don't take me there, I don't want to go. And he actually asked her to open a Bible. He handed her a Bible and said, just open this Bible. And so she opened it, and he said, I'm a prophet, and I can see by the page that you turned to that you're going to die very soon unless you accept my treatment.
Eventually the witch doctor began to do a lot of weird things, watch her bathe, and it made her very uncomfortable, and eventually he abused her and raped her.
She would just cry herself to sleep every night. She was afraid, she wanted to go home, she wanted to escape, but she was scared of him. And
she got really scared one day and she decided that she was gonna run away. And she ran all the way to the neighboring village where her uncle was and told her uncle everything that happened through tears. And the next day they arrested the witch doctor for the abuse that he'd done, but then the next day he was let go.
And he came to the family's house and said, you know, you owe me money for my services to your daughter.
Well, we can't pay what you're asking. He was asking all these cattle, and he said, okay, just sign these papers and that'll settle the debt. Well, the family was illiterate. They didn't know how to read or write, and so they signed, you know, the papers of the IOU, and basically the witch doctor stole everything that the family had.
It's not just the parents, it's the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the whole family. All their wealth is measured in cattle, and they gave all of it away to him. And so now the whole family looks at Galase and says, you're a curse on the family, you have to get out.
Eventually she found out that she was pregnant by the witch doctor.
So she goes to his door and says, you have to give my family back the cattle because I'm gonna have a baby and they have to help me take care of it. I'm not asking you for anything, just please give them back the cattle. And he says, I'll either kill you and the baby, which would be an act of mercy, or you can come and live with me as a mistress and I'll take care of you. So she said she planned to just stay for the one night and make a plan in the morning to get out. And one day turned into a week into a month. 8 years later, we're sitting at my kitchen table having this conversation. And she said, you know, when I would hear your stories about how Jesus loved me so much and he's a loving father, I knew he wanted me to have a job, because if I had a job, I could escape from that situation and take my daughter out of it. She said, last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, after wrestling with God for all these years, I forgave him. I realized last night that it's not just about me. I have a relationship with God now, and it's wonderful, but there's so many people that I know, there's so many women that I know in my village who are in this situation where they're stuck with some man because they don't have a job, they don't have any way to make a life for themselves. But I could teach them how to make the paper beads, help them to sell them, and while I'm teaching them, I can share with them about God's love and how he wants to have a relationship with them. What do you think?
In our village, there's a lot of kids who are having kids just because they think that giving themselves away, they'll be able to get a better life. But I decided that teaching them how to make busy, it can keep them always busy, and knowing the word of God, they can be able to be able to gather themselves up and know between good and evil, and they'll be able to do what is good.
And Allison asked, are there other women in your village who that's happened to? And Galase said, yeah, there's tons of women in my village who are in sexual slavery to a man. She said, I want to dedicate my life to ministering to women like this. She started sharing the gospel with these women, and women started becoming born again. And every day the group would come together and they would study the Bible together, they would make paper beads together.
She said, and even I want to start going to the prison, and when men are being released from rape charges, I'm going to share with them right away, so maybe they'll make a different life and they won't keep hurting people like I was hurt. And I knew in that moment, I didn't have that much grace in my heart, even like she did. And I just looked at her and saw that God had wiped her clean and given her this living, beating heart.
Even after all this time, Galase is still not able to get out on her own because her family has been sucking basically all the resources that she's bringing in, whether it's an overdue water bill, or the family needs this money, or the sister has gone to jail and needs to be bailed out, or this cousin's school fees need to be paid. Galase's money has just been going out to all her family and everything.
She's worked for the past 3 years to save up money to be able to have her own place. And this past week, we started looking for a place for her to stay in Lobatse. That's where she wanted to live.
Yeah, just lives the environment.
So we drove all over town.
We searched and searched, and we were just praying, God, we need you to show up. We need you to provide. And so day after day, we went out and looked, for different places and never found anything. And
that morning, she just kept saying, I have a good feeling God's going to provide the place today. He's going to provide the place. So we drove all over town, and it was just more of the same story. There's no availability, it's too expensive, or the place would be run down.
But finally, there was a group of men that said, yeah, we have a house, for rent. And so we were all excited. We woke up, we went, and we picked up Galase from the village. Galase said, I have a really good feeling about today.
We got there, ready to move into the house, and the whole deal ended up just falling through.
At that time, it was time for us to go to the care center to be with the children. And so we left, we went to the church, we were having fun with the kids, and Galase just kind of slipped out and she went walking.
And she saw a house with no curtains in it, which means usually that it's for lease.
And she was walking around the neighborhood right there where the church is, and she came upon this house. And the people said, well, yeah, we just had people move out, like you can come and check it out. She came to the church and she said, hey, y'all, I think I found the house.
So she tells them to wait 2 minutes. She runs back to the church, gets all of us. So we all get in the car together, drive over to this house.
And we went in, and it was perfect.
Getting to watch her walk into her own house for the first time, that's just one of those moments that I'll treasure as long as I live.
And so it was just God just, after all of the waiting and the patience and us just putting our hope in Him, He just showed up at the very end of the day and just provided in a way that only He could have done.